Walkerton, Indiana doesn't look like the kind of place that keeps secrets. It's flat country marked with cornfields, creeks, a handful of old roads that go straight until they run out of road and then out of nerve. The kind of land where everything seems out in the open, but dig deep enough and the past has a way of bleeding through. It was the fall of 1925, late enough in the year that the farmers could take just the smallest of breaks from the regular work, but not so late that the ground had turned cold and hard. Grove Vosburg was 70 years old, content with the end of another season of agriculture, and ready to scratch an itch that had been bothering him for some time. Out there on his property, beneath the giant stump of a fallen oak tree, there was a mound. Vosburg was tired of wondering what was under there. He was ready to find out. Vosburg called upon a few of his neighbors. They started to dig. 5 feet down, it was dirt and rocks. 10 feet down, more dirt and more rocks. But just a little bit further, and that's when they hit something hard, buried in the soil. Not a rock, not wood. They cleared the dirt away, turned the object in their hands. A jawbone. Big, too big. The kind of thing you don't forget. Teeth the size of walnuts. Heavy as a skillet. Wrong, in the way that old bones sometimes are. More bones followed. Ribs like barrel staves. A skull with a brow like a shovel blade. It looked like a man mostly, but taller, broader, ancient. In all, 8 skeletons, arranged in formation, each one buried with its own copper armor. Further down, even more treasures. Ores of silver and gold, weapons, relics, artifacts. Just like that, the story started to spread. Quiet at first, like all strange things in small towns, then louder. The South Bend Tribune ran with it. By the end of the month, the story had made the California papers. It was in Time magazine. People said Vosburg had found a giant, one of the old ones. This is the story of the lost giants of Walkerton, the people who went looking for them, the people who found them, and the people who might have lost them all over again. Hello and welcome to A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum in South Bend. I'm your host, Aaron Helman, and during this series we are going to dive into some of the spooky stories that you'll find around Michiana, from ghost stories to true crime to unbelievable myths, legends, and folklore. We will take a few historical liberties with the content of some of these stories because by nature, they're rooted in rumor and legend and not historical fact. But that doesn't mean we won't learn plenty of history along the way, and my goal is to help you learn something, stay entertained, and maybe scare you out of your socks while we're at it. During the course of this episode, you'll hear fictional advertisements for very real historical companies and products. We do that to help break up the podcast, provide some levity, to include just a little more history than we could otherwise, and to give you a sense of the time and place when and where all of this is happening. And now, with all that out of the way, let's go hunting for giants. We won't be the first ones to take on such a quest, and we certainly won't be the last. That's because long before they put shovels in the ground at Vosburg's farm, before Walkerton had a name, before Indiana was even a word, the stories were already here. Not in books, not in newspapers, definitely not in Time magazine, but in the stories passed around fires, stories kept alive in the space between generations, handed down from elder to elder, and remembered not for entertainment, but because they mattered. And in those stories, there were giants. Almost every Native American people across North America had them, beings of tremendous height and strength, larger than life in more ways than one. Sometimes they were warriors, sometimes they were builders, sometimes monsters, sometimes gods. To the Lenape, they were the Allegowee, a race of enormous people who lived along the rivers east of the Mississippi. The Lenape said their ancestors fought a war against them and drove them out, where they disappeared into the lands beyond memory. The Choctaw told of the Nahulo, pale-skinned giants who lived in the woodlands before the people arrived. Not just tall, but terrifying, known for their strength, feared for their appetite. Stories say they hunted humans. Stories say they were cannibals. Out west, the Paiute spoke of the Sitaka, red-haired giants who lived in caves near what is now Nevada. They were said to be brutal and warlike, great in number, but eventually defeated in a final desperate battle. The survivors were trapped in a cave, the entrance set aflame. Other stories came from the Iroquois, the Ojibwe, the Cree, the Sioux. Different names, different details, but always the same broad shape. A people that came before, towering, powerful, unnatural. Some tribes held that the giants had been here first, primordial beings shaped from the bones of the earth, strong enough to carve river valleys and flatten mountains. Others said they came later, that they arrived by boat or crossed through portals or emerged from the ground itself. But almost all the stories end the same way. The giants are gone now, and nobody is entirely sure why. Maybe they were destroyed. Maybe they were punished. Maybe they disappeared underground or into another world entirely. Maybe they're still out there. Maybe that's the whole point of telling the story, to remind people not to dig too deep. Today, anthropologists call these tales folklore, myths, cultural memory, and maybe that's all they are. But if you line the stories up side by side, it's hard not to notice the patterns. They come from tribes that never met, from opposite sides of the continent, from languages and customs that never crossed paths. The stories aren't always the same, but they certainly rhyme. So when the diggers unearthed those massive bones in 1925, it wasn't completely out of the blue. It fit neatly into a narrative that already existed on the continent. It slotted nicely into stories that people had already heard. And for the colonizers, there was one version of the story that they most desperately wanted to believe. That just maybe, there had been white people here much earlier than anyone ever imagined. We'll get into that after the break.
Dress up your front room with a stunning piece from the Walkerton Central Cut Glass Factory. Whether it's a sparkling vase, a decorative bowl, or the special goblets that you pull out when company arrives, a piece from the Walkerton Cut Glass Factory tells the world that you have refined taste. It's the best reason to visit Walkerton. And now, back to A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum.
The story goes like this. In the year 1170, centuries before Columbus ever caught a breeze toward the New World, a Welsh prince named Madoc set sail westward across the Atlantic. He was a younger son, with little claim to the throne, and Wales was already descending into civil war. So Madoc took to the sea with a fleet of ships, a handful of loyal men, and a dream of finding something better. They say he crossed the ocean, landed somewhere on the shores of the New World, maybe in the Gulf, maybe farther north, depends on who's telling it. He built a settlement. Then he returned to Wales, gathered more colonists, and vanished into legend. That part of the story is old, recorded in Welsh folklore by the 1500s, possibly older still. But it wasn't until centuries later, when Europeans began exploring the interior of North America, that Madoc's name really took root. Because when they got here, they started hearing stories from Native American tribes about white-skinned people who lived far inland, stories of light-eyed warriors, of red-haired giants, of strange languages that sounded, at least to some ears, vaguely Celtic. And from that whisper of coincidence, a legend bloomed. They called them the Welsh Indians, supposed descendants of Madoc's lost expedition, living among the Mandan along the Missouri River, hiding in the caves of Kentucky, wandering the forests of Tennessee. You could always find someone somewhere who'd seen them, or knew someone who had, or had read it in a book once, or maybe just wanted to believe. The idea was seductive, especially to 18th and 19th century settlers who wanted desperately to believe that white people had been here first. They looked at the mounds, the bones, the ruins, and they told themselves, this couldn't have been built by the people who live here now. They told themselves, this must have been ours once, and maybe it still is. That's the story anyway. Now here's the history. Prince Madoc almost certainly didn't exist. The first written accounts of him show up in the 1580s, during a time when the British Crown was looking for legal and moral justification to colonize the Americas. The Madoc legend served a useful purpose. We're not invaders. We're coming home. And the so-called Welsh Indians? The linguistic evidence was circumstantial at best, laughable at worst. Early explorers often heard what they wanted to hear, claiming Welsh roots in everything from Cherokee chants to Mandan prayers. There is no credible archaeological evidence of a pre-Columbian Welsh settlement in North America, no consistent record of a distinct white-skinned tribe among the native nations, but that hasn't stopped people from believing it and repeating it. Besides, they'll say, if it wasn't Madoc's men that the Walkerton farmer dug up, then who was it? That was the question everyone was asking on October 4th, 1925, when the article ran in the South Bend Tribune. A skeleton in copper armor, the bones of 8 other men of some period far distant in the past, curiously wrought pipes and other interesting relics, were found by 2 brothers who opened an old mound on the farm of Grove Fosburg. Digging down from the top of the mound, the Litchfield brothers, at a depth of 12 feet, were rewarded by coming upon human bones. They found 8 skeletons, lying like the spokes of a wheel, with the skulls at the center. On one of the skeletons, a large one, judging from the size of the bones, were pieces of copper armor, breastplates and other bands, eroded by the years but still easily recognizable. A beautifully wrought arrowhead was still embedded in the skull of this man who discoverers think may have been 9 feet in height. The skull also showed signs of a dent, indicating that this warrior was a real fighting man who had withstood the clouts of war clubs but had finally been laid low by a flint arrow. Buried with the bones were 3 pounds of ore, which looks like silver, but the Litchfields think may be white gold. Copper bands, which apparently had been fastened around war clubs, were also found. Perhaps the most interesting discovery was 2 pipe bowls. One was a plain bowl of black stone smoothly polished. The other represented a figure which looked like some prehistoric monster, best described as a sort of hippopotamus with a lizard-like tail. The antiquity of the mound has been established. The father of the present owner of the farm is said to have inquired of the Indians, who still were there to be found in this territory in his day, what they knew of the mound, but they all professed ignorance. Those who have examined the skeletons are struck by the great size of the bones. The Litchfields say the skulls do not look like those of Indians. Practically no head is apparent, and the openings for eyes seem to come out of the top of the head. The article ends like this. Part of the bones, the pipes, and the copper pieces have been taken to the homes of the discoverers. The real question, though, is where they went to next.
Have you ever seen alligators? Would you like to? Well, now you can. Visit the Nash Motor Company sales room anytime during October 1925, where we, for some reason, have 2 live alligators from Florida wandering the sales floor. And while you're here admiring the gators, why not buy a car from us? Visit Nash at 100 Lincoln Way East in South Bend, where we're chomping for your business. And now, back to A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum.
By the time the South Bend Tribune ran its story, the Walkerton dig had already become something bigger than a local curiosity. Word spread fast. 8 skeletons in a wheel formation, a giant in copper armor, pipes carved into the shapes of monsters, strange metals, weapons, artifacts. People came to see, to poke around, to ask questions. But the bones, the armor, the relics, they didn't stay around very long. According to the article, part of the bones, the pipes, and the copper pieces were taken to the homes of the Litchfield brothers. That's the last confirmed record we have. From that point on, the trail goes cold. No follow-up stories, no photos, no academic examination, no formal cataloging, no museum, no archive, no box in the back room of the courthouse with Walkerton, 1925, scribbled across the top in pencil. It's as if it all disappeared, which of course has only deepened the legend. There are rumors, naturally. Some say the Smithsonian came in and took everything to Washington, where the bones were tucked into a vault and forgotten, maybe even on purpose. Others claim that the bones were bought up by the representatives of a traveling circus, not exactly the type of people who were going to take long-lasting care of their historic objects. There's even a rumor that some of the bones and relics were handed over to the Northern Indiana Historical Society, the very institution now known as the History Museum in South Bend. The people I talk to swear they have nothing of the sort. So does that mean it's all made up? Almost certainly not. In all likelihood, there was a mound. In all likelihood, it was the Litchfield brothers who dug it up. As for what they found, maybe they exaggerated it. Or at least they didn't stop anyone who tried to exaggerate it for them. Anyway, there are still plenty of people around Walkerton who would swear an oath that their own grandfathers were there, saw the bones, held the artifacts, and in every case, have no idea what happened to them later. That's the thing about artifacts. Either they're protected, or they're gone. And once they're gone, all you're left with is a story. And stories, as we've seen, tend to grow. Hey, thanks for joining us on A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum in South Bend. There's more history waiting for you at historymuseumsb.org. I'm your host, Aaron Helman. The theme music is Whose Distance Is It Anyway by Neil Carmichael. Our next episode will head over to Notre Dame, where we'll explore ghost stories on campus. Until then, keep learning new things, and remember, everything is fascinating as long as you stay curious.